So again, we're hitting on the Great Depression and looking at all the different things that built into this economic crisis. We talked about the agricultural depression. We talked about overproduction. The increased production, does create corporate profits and dividends and stock speculation, but it doesn't actually make the individual worker more rich. This plays into the idea of what Calvin Coolidge kind of had come up with. Or not come up with, but the economic theory that Coolidge had bought into, which is called trickle-down economics. And we kind of talked about that in the last module, but trickle-down economics essentially is the idea that if you allow the top end of companies, the owners of companies, the business owners to have more money and profit, if you open up the economic system so that they make more money, that they will invest that money into their companies. And part of investing that money into their companies will eventually trickle its way down into more wages for the everyday person. So in theory, the idea is the more money you make, the more you can pay your workers. Unfortunately, humans don't really work like that. And typically, the more money you make, the more money you try and figure out how to make. And it doesn't really very often play into helping other people make money, right? Unfortunately, that is the human greed aspect of this. But you also have these real estate speculation that is going to be going on that, they're going to be trying to buy up land because they think, this land is going to be worth a whole lot more now that people have more money and all these things are going well. This land's going to be worth a whole lot. And so you go and you buy up 10,000 acres of desert. You're like, people are going to want to live here, and then nobody wants to live there. And you took the money and you took a loan for it, and now you can't pay the loan back, and you end up with the same problem of buying stock on credit. And again, so basically you end up with the situation where America is at the height of an economic bubble, and that bubble is really going to bust because it's been artificially inflated with loaned money and money that is not really backed up by anything. And as soon as people figure out that this is not real, it's going to come crashing back down. Companies really had done their part to expand this bubble. They had slowed down hiring, and some of them actually saw a freeze in hiring. And corporate profits are going to go way up, and workers' wages are not. So they're going to stop hiring people because the corporate level, they realize before anybody else does, this is slowing down a lot. They have a heads up. Now, it's kind of crooked because those people are the ones that typically got out of it with a little bit better off because they realized the economic turn was coming before the average person did, right? But at this point in time, the richest 1% of Americans owned over 1/3 of all value in the United States. 1% owned about 1/3 of all wealth. And when wealth is concentrated into the hands of a very few number of people, and then those people are not using that money to reinvest it and spread it out as the idea in trickle-down economics is supposed to work, if that's not happening, you're going to have devastating consequences. And, today the breakdown of wealth gap is fairly impressive. Does anybody know what it takes to be in the top 1% in the United States? Does anybody have a clue? I think it's $270,000 a year. Now, you might be, that's not really that much. If you really think about it, when you say the top 1%, so when you hear people like Bernie Sanders or some of these other politicians like AOC and them, they're like, we need to tax the top 1%. I don't know that I would say somebody making $270,000 is making so much money that they don't have any problems.
So like most athletes are all
all athletes. The NFL league minimum is $620,000 a year or something like that. So all professional athletes are pretty much in the top 1% of the United States. It's really not as high as you think it is, right? They're thinking, tax the rich, tax the top 1%. That's probably people you might know in the top 1% of wage earners in America, because you have to understand that The vast majority of people are in the $150,000 to $50,000 range.
It's talking like individual or like as a.
Individual, like wage earners. Households would be like $500,000 a year or something like that. But again, you probably know people that make that much money. You probably do. And those people, now, even some of the poorest people in America are in the top 1% of the world. If the poor people in America are richer than almost anyone in the entire world. I mean, for real, if you make $40,000 a year, you're considered to be not making a whole lot of money in America, but you probably make more than 99.99% of people in Africa. That's the facts. Or in South America, or in Latin America, or in Honduras, or in like the Caribbean. Like, it's not close. So it's all perspective. The banks had very few regulations on them. There was no guarantees to customers whatsoever. If the customer let the bank borrow the money, and then the banks took that money and lent it out to somebody who was going to be kind of recklessly speculating in the stock market, and then the stock market crashes, too bad. And so that is going to be a big problem too, and that's really what's going to happen. And again, we talked about yesterday the idea of buying on margin. That spectators would borrow as much as 75% of the money that was needed to purchase a stock. And so they'd basically only have like 25% of what they needed to pay the loan back. And they'd go to the bank and be like, hey, I need $100,000. I'm going to buy some stock. And the bank was like, stock market's doing pretty good, but you got to have something. I mean, how much do you have? And you're like, I got like 25 grand. They're like, well, you're going to owe us like $120,000. No problem. I'm going to double this money tomorrow, right? And so the interest rate on that would be like, they'd go in because the bank is basically taking a huge risk. The bank would be like, all right, but we're going to give you this loan at 20% interest. Like a credit card. Like high interest rate, which is madness. Today, I mean, if you go buy a house, it's like, actually, I don't know what it is now. When we refinanced at the beginning of COVID, it was like 3%, which was historically low. But I'm sure it's probably still around like 9%, 8-9%, which is still very low. My parents, when they bought their first house in the 70s, it was like 18%. Okay? 20% on a loan is ridiculous. That's robbery. Don't go borrow money at 20% interest. And so the problem was these people were certain that the market's going to rise. I'm going to double my money. I'm going to pay you back, no problem, and keep the profits, and I'm going to be rich. And at this point, it wasn't taking a genius to be able to do that. But we end up at the stock market crash. So soaring prices are going to attract investors. The prices of the stock are going to far outweigh the company's actual value, as we had talked about, right? So you take the total value of how many stocks there are in the market, you add all of that together, and that's the market value of a company. So if a company that we talked about yesterday that grew to $20 million, had 100,000 shares, that's $200 a share, but because everybody wants to buy it and they think it's going to go to $400 a share, everybody's buying it at $350 a share. Well, it makes it look like the company's actually worth $35 million, but it's not. It's actually only worth $2 million. And when it comes out that the company's actually only worth $2 million and it's actually losing value, everybody that had bought it $35 million is going to lose their tails. And that's pretty much what happens. In 1925, the total value of the New York Stock Exchange was $27 billion. So every single stock, every company being traded on the New York Stock Exchange had a total value of stocks of $27 billion. In 4 years, because of all these things that were being allowed to happen, it had gone up to $87 billion. It had tripled 300% in 5 years. Now, regular growth is somewhere between 3 and 5% year to year. you're talking about 70% year to year, 60% year to year growth. That's not normal. Okay, and everybody was like, it's just because America's so great. It wasn't. This exponential growth means that the average stockholder had actually tripled the value of their stock portfolio, though. If you had $100,000 invested in 1925, by the time you got to 1929, you've made 200 grand. Assuming that you hadn't continued to reinvest and reinvest and reinvest, right? These they were manipulating the stocks, though. It would attract investors, triple their profit, and then, boom, you got a problem because that's not the real value. So it was profitable, and then you have the crash, known as Black Thursday and Black Tuesday. Now, you do need to know the difference between the two. Black Thursday actually happened to before Black Tuesday, okay? Even though Tuesday comes before Thursday in the week, Black Thursday happened first. So it was like you had Thursday and then the weekend and then Tuesday again. Boom. So here's what happens. Investors think the stock is at good value. They're going to pay more. Values are rising. They're going up. And then they decide, we're going to try and sell some stock. Hey, this is at a good point. I want to sell and get my money out. And then they start trying to find a buyer, and nobody wants to buy it. And when you're trying to sell a stock and nobody wants to buy it, there's an alarm going off that says, hey, if nobody wants to buy it, that means it's not worth what you're trying to sell it for. So you lower the price, and still nobody wants to buy it. And you lower the price, and still nobody wants to buy it. And you lower it and lower it and lower it, and if nobody wants to buy it, then all of a sudden the stock price is going down like this, and then other people start noticing like, hey, this dude can't sell his stock. I need to try and sell my stock. And then you flood the market with stock that nobody wants to buy, and all of a sudden a panic starts. On October 24th of 1829, stock prices begin a serious plunge, and a sell-a-thon begins in the afternoon. And you have people like J.P. Morgan who are trying to get their resources together and buy as much of this stock as they possibly can with all the wealth that they have, and they're going to buy all the stock that everybody has. Because if he can get people to stop trying to sell it, because he's like, no, there's people out here that want to buy it. If you can get people to stop selling it, the price will stop going down. So he's trying to show everybody, no, this is fine. We're going to buy all that we can. And he does enough to kind of get it to reverse a little bit. But people are really, really freaked out. And Monday rolls around and people are still kind of jittery. They're waiting for something to happen. And then 5 days later on Black Tuesday, October 29th, 16 million stocks are attempted to be sold for lower and lower and lower and lower and lower values. And as the day progressed, you would, if you tried to sell, you would get less than you did 10 minutes ago. And for some stocks, nobody wanted to buy it. They were trying to sell it, they had bought this stock for $100 a share, and they're trying to sell it for $3 a share, and nobody wants it. Right?
Isn't the ultimate time to buy stocks those ones that we hit an all-time low though?
Yes, but it's because these stocks are in companies that are failing, but everybody thought they were doing great. But the company is actually failing and is a terrible company, and it's going to go bankrupt soon, but people thought it was going great. And so they had bought up all this stock, and then a report comes out and it's like, hey, actually, we're going bankrupt next week. And all that stock that you have is going to be worth zero. And they're like, oh, no. You get what I'm saying? Within 10 short weeks, the value of the entire market had been cut in half. American debt was already very high because they had taken all these loans out, and they had bought stocks, so they're still in debt, but now they have worthless stock that they had purchased with this debt, and they can't even pay it back. And the banks are going to go, well, we need that money. People want their money back. We need you to pay up your loan. And everybody goes, we can't. That money is just gone. Like, it's gone. These companies took our money, invested it, and then failed as a company. There is no money. It's gone. So the banks are like, sorry, everybody, we can't give you your money back. In fact, we are out of money, and we close. And those people just lost it. If you had your money in a bank and it closes, you just lost your money. You get nothing. Suicides went through the roof, for real. For about a 6-month stretch, people were jumping off of buildings at like dozens a day. Just jumping out of buildings in New York City. They lost everything. If you were a stockbroker, you had convinced all of your family and everybody you knew to let you handle their money and told them to go get loans, and then you lost everything that everybody had ever given you, and you had ruined your entire parents and kids and cousins and aunts and uncles' life savings, and they had nothing now. You're in a pretty tough spot. And people literally just would jump out of their buildings. I mean, it's kind of crazy. And so, this is the very beginning of it. The Dow Industrial Average, like I said, by September of 1929 was 381.17. By July of 1932 was at 41. 41. Okay? It's not going to reach this number again until 1954. That's how long it would take of natural growth for it to finally get back to where it was supposed to be. Okay? This is like people going to the bank and they're lined up trying to get money. And, it's just, there is no money. They're trying to get, go to the ATM. Oh, get my money out of the ATM, all my money, because this bank's going down. I wanted my money. And then some people got it out and some people just didn't. And the vast majority of people didn't. The depression is going to spread worldwide because the American system had a lot of foreign investment from Europe. And so when our system fails, all that money that had been loaned from Europe, those banks are going to fail too. And they were being basically propped up after World War I because of the American economy. And now the American economy is in the toilet. And Europe is going to go into a deep despair as well. And so it's going to last, for a decade almost. And roughly 90% of households, had not done anything with the stock market. Only 10% of people had ever even traded a stock in the United States. Only 10%. But that 10%, when they caused the market to crash, the banks that held all the other 90% of people's monies went under, and those people, even though they had done nothing wrong or nothing, they hadn't been risky with their money was gone too. So it's kind of, yeah. In 1930 alone, 26,000 businesses fail. They lay off millions of workers. People no longer have money to be consumers, which then continues to cause more problems. Unemployment in 1929, before the crash, was 3.2%. Within 4 years, it was 25%. U.S. Steel, the Carnegie's company that J.P. Morgan had purchased for $300 billion, went from 250 full-time workers in 1929 to bankrupt, closed, with 0 workers by 1933. One of the businesses that people said, this one will never fail. It's always a good bet. Closed its factory doors within 4 years of its height. Some cities are hit much worse. Unemployment in Detroit, 45%. Chicago, 50%. Akron, Ohio, 60%. Toledo, Ohio, 80% unemployment. Nobody's working. And that is really where you kind of end up with this Great Depression. And then we're going to talk about now what? What is life like during the Great Depression and what happens moving forward? And that's going to be our next section.